Ladies and gentlemen,
The Martian ambassador is going to say a few words.
come on down, Mr. Ambassador.
Mars Attacks invaded theaters in 1996, and chances are you remember the exploding heads, the ridiculous Martian voices, and Jack Nicholson dying in the most absurd ways possible. But what you saw on screen barely scratches the surface of how chaotic and bizarre the actual production turned out to be. First up, this whole movie exists because of a pack of trading cards that caused a nationwide scandal back in 1962. Topps released a series called Mars Attacks with 55 hand-painted cards showing a Martian invasion in graphic, violent detail. The artist Norman Saunders painted these things in oil, giving them this fever dream quality that made every melting human face in Ray Gun Massacre look disturbingly beautiful. Parents completely lost their minds over the gore and the suggestive imagery, forcing Topps to halt production after repainting several cards to tone down the violence. The set became this forbidden cult object that collectors obsessed over for decades. Tim Burton discovered them as a kid and never forgot that mix of horror and candy-colored Americana, which became the entire spine of the movie. What makes this origin story even more interesting is that the cards had a whole creative team behind them. Len Brown handled the concept and copy, Woody Gelman served as the Topps product lead, and pencilers Wally Wood and Bob Powell laid out the compositions before Saunders painted them. That collaborative approach to creating pulp horror gave the cards an unusually specific narrative spine for bubblegum collectibles. Each card told part of a larger story following the invasion from first strike all the way to a counterattack on Mars. Burton understood that structure mattered, that these weren't just random images, but a serialized apocalypse in your pocket. So here's where it gets even stranger. When screenwriter Jonathan Gems pitched the idea to Burton in the early 1990s, they actually wanted to make a different Topps property first. Dinosaurs Attack was another trading card series with the same violent spirit, just with prehistoric monsters instead of aliens. They were all set to move forward until someone mentioned that Steven Spielberg had a Jurassic Park sequel coming. And rather than compete with that franchise, Burton and Gems rented a copy of The Towering Inferno and watched it like homework. That 1970s disaster movie became their template, which is why Mars Attacks feels like a star-studded catastrophe picture, where everyone takes turns getting obliterated while the camera bounces between subplots. The influence runs deep because those Irwin Allen disaster movies had this specific rhythm, introducing character after character in their own little worlds before bringing them together in the chaos. Burton and Gems borrowed that entire playbook, creating these separate storylines in Washington, Las Vegas, and small-town Kansas that eventually collide when the Martians attack. The decision to avoid dinosaurs and lean into aliens turned out to be crucial because it freed them from any expectation of scientific accuracy or realistic behavior. Martians could be as absurd and cartoonish as Burton wanted without anyone complaining about paleontological errors. Now for the third secret, those Martians were supposed to be stop-motion puppets, not computer graphics. Burton hired animator Barry Purvis and assembled an international team to build maquettes, miniature sets, and articulation rigs for traditional Ray Harryhausen-style animation because he wanted that jerky, tactile quality he loved from old monster movies. But the costs exploded, the schedule got tighter, and Warner Bros. Started sweating. The studio pushed hard for CGI because it seemed faster and more controllable, even though Burton resisted at first. This represented a massive shift in how fantasy films were being made in the mid-1990s. Stop motion had been the gold standard for creature effects for decades, giving us everything from King Kong to The Empire Strikes Back. But Jurassic Park proved that computer graphics could create believable living creatures. Burton was caught between his love of handmade animation and the practical realities of modern filmmaking. The stop-motion prep work wasn't wasted, though, because all those maquettes and design studies informed the digital versions that ILM eventually created. What changed his mind was surprisingly specific. ILM created a simple test showing Martians lifting a Volkswagen Beetle And that specific test had so much personality and physical comedy that Burton finally agreed to go digital. Multiple crew members remember that Volkswagen moment as the turning point. Effects artists also mentioned using footage from other projects, including a shot connected to Jumanji, just to experiment with how these spindly, big-brained creatures might move in real environments. That test proved computer animation could capture the manic energy Burton wanted without losing the toy soldier aesthetic he loved. The Volkswagen choice was genius because it's such an icon of quirky Americana. The people's car turned into a prop for alien mayhem. ILM understood they had to sell Burton on personality and humor rather than just technical capability. The animators studied Tex Avery cartoons and classic Looney Tunes to get that exaggerated physical comedy into the Martians' movements. They wanted the aliens to feel like cartoon characters inhabiting a live-action world, which required a specific kind of motion that blended realistic physics with impossible elasticity. The fifth detail involves a script that was completely out of control. Imagine trying to write a screenplay with 60 lead characters, which is exactly what Jonathan Gems delivered to Burton in the early draft. They were planning attacks across Asia, Europe, Africa, India, Russia, everywhere you can think of. The screenplay was this globe-spanning apocalypse with dozens of simultaneous storylines that would have cost a fortune and taken forever to shoot. Burton and Gems eventually cut it down to 23 main characters and focused the destruction on a handful of iconic American landmarks. The Taj Mahal still gets vaporized for international flavor, but most of the carnage happens in Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas. This editing process was crucial because it forced them to choose which American archetypes they wanted to satirize most viciously. The president, the smooth-talking scientist, the Las Vegas hustler, the trailer park family, the talk show host, each character represents a different slice of American culture that the Martians gleefully destroy. By concentrating the action geographically, Burton could also create this interesting contrast between the centers of political and entertainment power. Washington represents official America, while Vegas represents ID and excess, and watching both get obliterated by the same bug-eyed invaders creates this equalizing effect where nobody's special and everyone's equally screwed. Here's a wild one. The opening image of flaming cows stampeding across Kansas wasn't just a shock gag for Jonathan Gems. It was the perfect thesis statement for the entire film. Warner Brothers demanded the cows get cut from multiple drafts. Gems refused every time because nothing else captured that blend of cruel absurdity and Americana he was going for. After the studio explicitly told him not to include burning cattle in the next draft, he turned it in with the cows still burning. They fired him over it. He eventually came back to finish the script, and the cows stayed in the final film, announcing right from frame one that this movie will not behave. The studio's resistance makes sense from their perspective, because opening your big-budget blockbuster with livestock on fire seems like a guaranteed way to alienate family audiences and animal lovers. But Gems and Burton understood that the burning cows served a specific purpose beyond shock value. They immediately tell you that sentiment is dead, that nothing is sacred, and that the movie will treat suffering as comedy. It's a litmus test built into the first scene. If you can't handle flaming cattle, you definitely can't handle what comes next. The fact that Gems was willing to get fired over this detail shows how important tone was to the entire project. The Martian language wasn't placeholder gibberish that got polished later, which is what number 7 is all about. When writers Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski did a Polish on the script, they wrote out the aliens' dialogue as precise rhythmic syllables on the page so performers and animators could treat Martian speech like actual dialogue with comedic beats. Editor Chris Lebenzon and composer Danny Elfman locked their cuts and musical cues to those staccato rhythms, which is why the aliens feel oddly musical when they talk. This attention to the rhythm of nonsense pays off throughout the movie because it gives the Martians a weird consistency. They're not just making random sounds, they're having conversations with grammar and emphasis and comic timing. Alexander and Karaszewski, who had just worked with Burton on Ed Wood, brought their understanding of outsider characters to the Martians. They treated the aliens like vaudeville performers, giving them this rat-a-tat delivery that feels both aggressive and playful. The decision to make ack into structured dialogue meant that animators could sync lip movements and body language to specific beats, creating this illusion that we're watching real communication, even though we have no idea what they're actually saying most of the time. Those alien voices come from one of Hollywood's most prolific creature performers. Frank Welker voiced the Martians, though he went uncredited, and this guy is behind Gremlins, Transformers, Scooby-Doo's Fred, and about 1,000 other non-human characters. His specialty is pushing consonants and sounds into textures that don't feel human at all. Once you know it's him, you can hear his signature style in the way the Martians snarl and yelp. Welker has this incredible ability to use his vocal cords in ways that bypass normal speech patterns. He approaches creature voices like a sound effects artist rather than an actor, thinking about frequency and texture instead of emotion or clarity. For Mars Attacks, he needed to create something that felt genuinely alien, but also funny, which is a tricky balance. Too weird, and the Martians become incomprehensible noise. Too familiar, and they lose their otherworldly menace. Welker found this sweet spot where the sounds are recognizably coming from a throat, but don't sound like any language or animal you've ever heard. The fact that he went uncredited is typical for creature work, which rarely gets the same recognition as on-camera performances, even though it requires just as much skill and creativity. The ninth secret connects Mars Attacks to another 1996 icon in an unexpected way. The Martian translator device, that little box that converts ack into smarmy English, was voiced by Roger L. Jackson as an uncredited favor. That job became a huge break for him, because Jackson later revealed that voicing the translator led directly to his audition for Scream, where he became the voice of Ghostface. The path from We Come in Peace to Do You Like Scary Movies runs straight through a cheap prop speaker in this movie. Jackson's voice has this quality that sounds both smooth and sinister, which worked perfectly for the translator because it needed to sound artificial and vaguely threatening even while saying reassuring things. That disconnect between the pleasant robotic voice and the violent intentions it's covering up becomes one of the film's running jokes. The Martians use the translator to lie constantly, claiming they come in peace right before vaporizing everyone in sight. Jackson's performance captures that false sincerity perfectly, and apparently, the Scream casting directors heard something in that robotic quality that suggested he could make a phone call feel menacing. Both roles require making disembodied voices feel present and dangerous, which is a specific talent that Jackson clearly has in abundance. Mars Attacks reunited Tim Burton and Danny Elfman after creative tension during The Nightmare. Before Christmas almost ended their partnership, and the score Elfman delivered is one of his most playful. Here's the detail most people miss. That eerie wailing instrument you hear isn't a theremin, even though everyone assumes it is. Elfman used an Ons Martineau, a French electronic instrument from the 1920s that has a vocal, keening quality, because he tried to find a theremin player he liked but couldn't. That choice gives the score a wobbly, haunting timbre that avoids the obvious theremin cliché while still sounding perfectly alien and retro-futuristic. The Ondes Martineau has this interesting history as one of the first electronic instruments ever invented, and it creates sound through a ribbon controller that the player slides their finger along. This gives it more expressiveness than a theremin, because the player has finer control over pitch and vibrato. Elfman's decision to use it shows his commitment to finding the right sonic texture, even when it meant going with a more obscure option. The score needed to evoke 1950s science fiction without directly copying the sound of those old films, and the Ons Martineau provided that slightly off-kilter quality. Elfman also incorporated big band elements and lounge music into the Vegas sequences, creating this sonic landscape where different eras of American pop culture crash into each other. The music matches the film's retro-futuristic aesthetic, sounding both nostalgic and strange at the same time. Tim Burton loved the idea of Jack Nicholson appearing everywhere in this movie. Nicholson joked about playing every role, and Burton clearly wished he could make that happen. The compromise was casting Jack as two completely different characters, President James Dale and Las Vegas con artist Artland, both of whom die in spectacularly grotesque ways. Burton reportedly told Nicholson he wanted to see him die in as many ways as possible, and on set, crew members would play Hail to the Chief whenever Nicholson showed up in presidential costume. The dual casting creates this weird effect where Jack's star presence becomes part of the joke. You're always aware that you're watching Jack Nicholson play dress-up, which undercuts any attempt at dramatic sincerity. As President Dale, he tries to be reasonable and diplomatic, even as evidence mounts that the Martians are definitely not here in peace. As Artland, he's a cynical operator who thinks he can cut a deal with aliens the same way he'd work a casino floor. Both characters share Nicholson's trademark charm, and both discover that charm means nothing to skull-faced invaders with ray guns. Killing him twice felt excessive in the best way, fully committing to the idea that nobody survives on star power alone. The production made a big deal out of Nicholson's presidential scenes, treating them with mock seriousness that matched the film's satirical tone. Assembling this all-star cast required some creative deal-making. Casting director Matthew Barry explained that Warner Bros. Wouldn't greenlight the film at the budget Burton wanted until Nicholson officially committed. Most of the A-list actors, including Pierce Brosnan, Glenn Close, Danny DeVito, Annette Bening, and Sarah Jessica Parker, worked for around $100,000 a week. Nicholson's $5 million paycheck bought both prestige and studio confidence. This pay structure meant that Burton could pack the film with recognizable faces without completely destroying the budget. Though at $80 million, it was still an expensive gamble. The ensemble approach served the disaster movie homage, but also created this strange situation where major stars show up for a few scenes before getting killed in increasingly ridiculous ways. Pierce Brosnan, fresh off his debut as James Bond in Golden Face, plays a scientist whose head ends up separated from his body and kept alive in a jar. Glenn Close plays the First Lady with this brittle cheerfulness that makes her disintegration even funnier. Sarah Jessica Parker's head gets transplanted onto a chihuahua's body in one of the film's most memorably grotesque images. The willingness of these actors to participate in such undignified deaths suggests they understood Burton's vision and trusted him to make something genuinely different. Nobody signed up for Mars Attacks expecting a prestige picture or a serious career boost. They came because Burton was doing something weird with studio money, and they wanted to be part of it. Now here's something that explains the movie's weird legacy. Released on December 13, 1996, it opened in second place behind Jerry Maguire and topped out at $37.8 million domestically. International audiences were far more receptive though, bringing in $63.6 million for a worldwide total just over $101 million. With a production budget around $80 million plus marketing costs, that's break-even territory at best. The film performed much better overseas, which is why you'll hear it called a US flop, with a stronger international pulse. The timing of the release didn't help, because it came out the same year as Independence Day, which earned over $800 million worldwide and became the defining alien invasion movie of the decade. Critics were mixed, with some appreciating the anarchic spirit and others finding it mean-spirited and exhausting. The film's reputation has improved significantly over time as audiences discovered it on home video and developed an appreciation for its uncompromising weirdness. What seemed like tonal chaos in 1996 now reads as deliberate satire that was simply ahead of its time. The cult following that developed around Mars Attacks treats it as this perfect artifact of a specific moment when studios would still fund genuinely bizarre passion projects from established directors. The marketing for this movie was perfectly blunt about its attitude. The poster tagline, "Nice planet, we'll take it," shows up under a bubble-helmeted skull brain and tells you everything you need to know. Imperialism as catchphrase, entitlement as punchline. That banner was pure Mars Attacks logic, taking the language of conquest and reducing it to a smirking one-liner. The poster design leaned heavily on the imagery from the original trading cards, using that same garish color palette and retro-futuristic aesthetic. Warner Bros. Clearly understood they were selling something strange and decided to lean into it rather than try to make the film seem more conventional than it actually was. The trailer featured that great Tom Jones song, "It's Not Unusual," playing over Martian destruction, which perfectly captured the film's blend of violence and dark comedy. Marketing materials emphasized the all-star cast and Tim Burton's name as director, banking on his reputation for weird but successful films like Beetlejuice and Batman. The challenge was attracting audiences who wanted science fiction action while also preparing them for something much stranger and more satirical than a typical blockbuster. Production designer Wynne Thomas built sets that deliberately reference one of the great Cold War satires for the 15th Secret. The war room where President Dale and his advisors meet is a loving homage to Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, complete with bold geometry, glass, chrome, and mid-century futurism. That visual grammar supports the film's thesis that leaders are performers in their own spectacle, which is why Burton keeps puncturing presidential authority with pratfalls, robot hands, and alien pranks. Thomas worked closely with Burton to create this heightened version of America, where everything looks slightly artificial and theatrical. The White House interiors have this glossy unreality that makes them feel like movie sets, which reinforces the idea that political power is itself a performance. The Las Vegas sequences go even further with the artificiality, showing the city as this neon-soaked playground where nothing is real and everything is for sale. Thomas used color coding throughout the film, with cold blues and silvers for the government spaces and hot reds and golds for Vegas. The Martian saucers and technology got their own design language pulled straight from 1950s pulp covers, all chrome and colored lights with that streamlined Art Deco quality. Every design choice served the film's retro-futuristic aesthetic, creating a world that feels both nostalgic and alien at the same time. The technical wizardry ILM used to make those Martian brains look so disturbingly real is pretty fascinating. Computer graphics in 1996 weren't cheap or easy, and modeling all those neural ridges at high polygon counts would have been impossibly expensive. Instead, effects artists used displacement maps, which are basically detailed textures that push and pull geometry at render time. They painted brain detail into textures that the computer would interpret as three-dimensional depth without actually building all that complexity into the models. ILM also scanned or photographed the abandoned stop-motion maquettes to retain that handmade toy soldier quality Burton originally wanted. This hybrid approach meant that the digital Martians carried some DNA from the physical sculptures, giving them a tactile quality that pure CG often lacks. The animation team studied old monster movies to understand how stop-motion creatures moved, then tried to recreate that slight jerkiness and weight in their computer animation. They wanted the Martians to feel like Ray Harryhausen creations, even though they were completely digital. The brains were particularly challenging because they needed to look wet and organic while also catching light in interesting ways. Too much shine and they'd look plastic. Too little and they'd seem flat. The displacement mapping technique let them create all that surface detail without exploding render times, which was crucial for a film with hundreds of effects shots. Warner Digital handled the flying saucers separately from ILM's character work, which created an interesting division of labor where two different effects houses contributed to the overall look. Mars Attacks almost became a completely different movie a decade earlier. Director Alex Cox, who made Repo Man, secured development at TriStar in the late 1980s and wrote drafts with producer John Davison from RoboCop. But studio chaos, including a messy situation involving writer Martin Amis, eventually killed the project at TriStar. A full decade later, Burton revived it at Warner Bros. With Jonathan Gem's writing. Cox later wrote that Burton's decision to open with burning cattle was brilliant. Cox's version would have been fascinating in its own right given his punk sensibility and satirical edge, but it's hard to imagine it having the same glossy pop art quality that Burton brought to the material. The gap between Cox's failed attempt and Burton's successful version shows how much Hollywood changed in that decade. By the mid-1990s, Burton had enough clout from Batman and Edward Scissorhands that studios would take risks on his weirder projects. Cox never had that same level of industry power, so his Mars Attacks died in development hell. The fact that the property survived a decade in limbo and found new life with a completely different creative team speaks to the enduring appeal of those original trading cards and the story they told. The joke behind The Martian's ridiculous weakness is perfect for this movie. Instead of copying War of the Worlds, where germs kill the aliens in a solemn twist, Burton went with Slim Whitman's 1952 yodeling record Indian love call. The piercing high notes make Martian skulls explode, which is absurd, but also follows consistent internal logic because the sonic texture does the damage. Playing the song over speakers becomes an improvised weapon of mass destruction, and thematically, it works perfectly since silly pop culture gets weaponized against gleefully destructive invaders. The choice of Slim Whitman specifically adds another layer, because he represents this kitschy slice of American pop culture that seems completely harmless and even obsolete. A novelty yodeling record from the 1950s becomes the ultimate weapon against advanced aliens, which inverts every expectation about what matters in an invasion scenario. High-tech weapons fail, military might gets obliterated, but a cheesy old song saves the day. The finale, where the surviving humans broadcast the song worldwide, has this beautiful simplicity, turning every radio and television into a weapon just by playing music. It's the inverse of War of the Worlds, where H.G. Wells used germs to show that nature defeats technology. Burton uses pop culture kitsch to show that nothing matters and everything is equally ridiculous. The year 1996 was absolutely stacked with big visual effects spectacles, which brings us to the 19th secret. Mars Attacks made the Academy's visual effects shortlist for the bake-off round, where effects teams present their work, but it didn't crack the final 3 Oscar nominees. Independence Day, Twister, and Dragonheart moved forward, with ID4 winning the statue. That juxtaposition, Burton's acid cartoon playing against Roland Emmerich's patriotic alien invasion epic, cemented the myth of 2 alien movies with opposite tones released the same year. The Academy's preference for Independence Day makes sense given that film's technical achievements and crowd-pleasing heroism, but it also shows how Mars Attacks was always going to be too weird for mainstream recognition. The effects in Burton's film are deliberately stylized and cartoonish, which doesn't match the Academy's typical preference for photorealistic spectacle. The Martians are supposed to look like living cartoon characters, not believable aliens, and that aesthetic choice probably hurt the film's chances. Still, making the shortlist at all proves that ILM and Warner Digital delivered technically impressive work, even if the final nominees went in different directions. The final secret focuses on the Martian Girl, one of the film's most memorable visual jokes. Costume designer Colleen Atwood fused multiple reference points into a single character that works as both seduction and assassination. The silhouette blends Marilyn Monroe's bombshell glamour, Alberto Vargas' pinup curves, and Jane Fonda's campy futurism from Barbarella. Lisa Marie played the character silently, gliding through scenes like a mannequin that suddenly came alive, and the wig alone feels sculpted rather than styled. The Martian Girl is an alien assassin wrapped in the most exaggerated human sexuality. Atwood's costume design throughout the film draws on mid-century fashion and science fiction imagery, but the Martian Girl represents the peak of that aesthetic. She's constructed entirely out of male fantasies about women, which makes her the perfect infiltrator, because men keep underestimating her as decorative rather than dangerous. The reveal that she's actually a Martian in disguise comes after she's already seduced and killed several people, using human assumptions about beauty and sexuality as camouflage. Lisa Marie's performance is all physical, using exaggerated movements and poses that emphasize the artificiality of the character. She moves like someone imitating human behavior without quite understanding it, which creates this uncanny valley effect where she seems almost right, but fundamentally wrong. The Martian Girl became one of the most iconic images from the film, showing up on posters and marketing materials as this fusion of sex appeal and alien menace. Mars Attacks stands as this weird time capsule of a major studio, letting an eccentric director make something genuinely strange with a massive budget and an all-star cast. Don't forget to leave a like and hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed our 20 strange secrets from this movie. Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video.